we bring in a friend who we've known for years and years and years. He's an author, relationship therapist, Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson.
Some expert advice on how we can all talk to them. Joining us now is relationship expert Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson. She's the author of Courageous Conversations Connect. Good morning, R.G.
Doctor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Janelle. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And as we mentioned, a lot of people just dealing with anxiety during all of this. What are your suggestions?
Some of the things that we need to remember is that this is temporary. This is temporary inconvenience for long-term gain. And as long as we stay healthy, Janelle, then everything else is recoverable.
Talk to your children about what's happening right now. What are the best ways to do that?
There's some do's and don'ts, right? So you want to tell them that you're going to be here. We're going to be okay. Kids want to know that they're secure and they're safe. So predictability, structure, and consistency. You also want to let them know you have a plan. And even if you don't have a plan, tell them that you're working on one. And good morning. This is Dr. RG, yours truly for the Courageous Conversations Connect space. And this is our quarantine talks. This is June 25th, 2020, 15 weeks in quarantine. And this is episode 54. And so boy, do we have a good one for you. So listen, this is what we want you to do. We want you to tag a friend, share this video, go on over to YouTube if you haven't done it, and subscribe to our YouTube page at Ask Dr. RG, AskDrArgie. Hit the notification bell so you can get all the notifications. Also, if you're on Facebook, for all of our Facebook persons, go to the message section and type subscribe, not in this message section, but in the other message section on the YouTube, on the Facebook page. Type subscribe, get the notification, reply to it, and then you'll get all of our notifications. So good morning to our IG family. Good morning, YouTube family. Good morning, Facebook family. This is Quarantine Talks. So listen, we have got an amazing guest for you today. And we're going to be talking about, as we have all week, racial trauma and healing talks, but really specifically healing from the trauma of being Black and blue, right? What does that look like? And I'm just excited to have my little brother here with me. So listen, you know what we do. We're going to take a quick break from our sponsors. And while we do that, when we go into our breathing exercises, you're going to tell us who you're breathing for and who you're breathing with as we bring on our guests for the show today. All right, so stick with us. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, guys. This is our crew, Connecting Relationships for Epic Wins. And we're going to have our special guest. Let's see if he can unmute himself. Because I can't see him for some reason. Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask him. Unmute. Mute yourself. Okay, hopefully our guest will be back. We have him in the background and we want to make sure I think he went out to come back in. We have a little bit of technological difficulties, but we will get him back. So listen, I want for all of us to, as we bring our special guests back, I want you to think about who you're going to breathe for in our exercise. We're going to wait for a few more people to come on. We have Gilda, we have Angelique, hey Angelique, Belva, Lily Jefferson from Philly is on, Larissa, China, Roger, Lisa, Dr. Gail. I see our guest in the background. I'm going to ask him Can you hear me? Can you do a thumbs up if you can hear me? Yes? See, I can't hear him, babe. Hear me. You say yes? Okay, good. All right, cool. Morgan has them in the background for right now, but I want to give him a formal introduction, and he's going to do our breathing exercises. So think about who you're breathing with and for in our breathing exercises. And again, Morgan and I are just tickled pink to have our brother in Christ. I call him my little brother, G. Lamar Stewart, joining us today as we have a conversation, a courageous conversation about the trauma, the healing from the trauma of being Black and Blue. So let's bring him on as I introduce him to the show, Courageous Conversations Connect Space. I want you to know a few things about G. Lamar Stewart. Welcome to the show, G. Lamar.
Dr. Art, thank you so much for having me on today.
Morgan's clapping in the background. Thank you for thank you for coming on to the show. I want to tell our crew a little bit about you. First of all, I met you many years ago. We worship at the same church at Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. And there was something that I always knew was really special about you, but everyone may not know some details about you, that you are now the senior pastor of Taylor Memorial Baptist Church in the Nicetown, Tioga section of Philadelphia. You are also the chief of community engagement in Philadelphia for the DA's office and the Philadelphia County Detective, as well as vice president of the National Black Police Association. Vice President. Is it Pass?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. And you are, happy belated Father's Day, a father of 3, right? Junior, Gabrielle, and your oldest, Trey. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And just an advocate and an activist for community engagement in our people. And I think most importantly, my experience with you is that you are a son of God, a child of God, and that you continue to do the right thing by his people. Both in the pulpit and in the streets, and I would say now in the suites. And so from the streets to the suites to the pulpit, you've got it all covered. And yet, what's interesting about the dialogue that we're going to be having today, Greg, is that I know only too well, being the daughter of a police officer and homicide detective, my father, Hildred G. Allen, retired from the police force after 22 years. He's now been retired for 30 years. Can you believe it? He's 85 years young come December. And he sort of sometimes jokes about the fact that every time he gets his FOP magazine and he looks in the obituary section, he's like, I bet you they didn't think I was going to last this long. And he continues to get, his pension and all of that. But I can remember the days when my mom and my sisters and I were afraid for him. And, these days when you're talking about the protesters and the riots and police not necessarily being seen in the highest light, I imagine that that's stressful for you out there as well. So that's why we wanted to have the conversation about being Black, a Black man, and being blue, being a blue uniform, and what that looks like in terms of the trauma you all experience internally and externally. Will you stay with us for that conversation?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So listen, what we do usually around 10:10 is we do a breathing exercise. And I encourage all of our crew members to continue to do that breathing exercise. If you're on right now, you're new, Rich, I see Rich and Jessica and Karen and Charlotte. If you're on, tell us who you're breathing for and who you're breathing with. For the last couple of weeks, Greg, I've been breathing for and with the families of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and now Rayshard Brooks, and also all of our essential workers. And I'm breathing for all those men and women in blue that go out there, the good ones that are trying to protect and serve us. I'm breathing for them because your people, you're having a hard time too. So those are the persons that I'm breathing for. Who will you be breathing for today?
I know many named George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice and others we can name. There's a name in Philadelphia that some may remember, and it's David Jones. He was another black male who was killed by police here in Philadelphia. The anniversary of his death was last week, and fiance is a member of my church. He lives in California now, but today I briefed for him.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. So thank you for that. Larissa says, I'm breathing for my sons, Roger and Frederick Tate. Rich says, I'm breathing for my family. So there are people out there in our crew connecting relationships for epic wins that are breathing. What we ask people to do right around now is we get in our positions, we put our middle finger to our thumb or our hands, right hand over the left on our lap or to the sides. We get in a pretty relaxing posture. And then we breathe in 5 times through the nose, out through the mouth. While we're breathing in oxygen and out carbon dioxide, we're also breathing in hope and freedom and serenity and kindness and care for one another. And we're breathing out fear and worry and anxiety and anger and rage and all those things that do not help us because we're in a fight. So we need to be healthy, right? So at the sound of my voice, I'm going to count to 3. We're going to breathe in through the nose. I'm going to count on my fingers 8 seconds in honor of George Floyd's family, where he was on the ground with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And then we're going to breathe out. All right. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. One last time, crew, make it count. Breathe in. And out. That felt really good. So a lot of people don't know, Greg, that sometimes when we're so anxious, our cortisol levels go up, our adrenaline levels go up. I know you see this with officers on the streets, you know, when they're trying to protect the community. And what happens is then the oxytocin, the serotonin, the dopamine, all those good hormones, that goes down. And then it causes us not to really be able to breathe. Our respiratory systems are compromised, our digestive systems are compromised because, you know, the truth is that cortisol is to help us when we're in a fight. But if we're supposed to not be in a fight 24/7, and if we feel like we're in a fight 24/7, then we cannot function at our optimal capacity. Roger Latha says, breathing for my son, Roger, too, in Florida. Thank you, Roger. So let's get right into it. So one, thank you for being on the show. I so appreciate you, just as my brother, my little brother in Christ, and all the good work that you're doing in the community in terms of engagement. I mentioned that my dad was a homicide detective, and one of the things that I remember is that he knew in the beginning, from birth to 5, we grew up in West Oak Lane, right on the Dairy, not too far from where we live now. And then after he became a homicide detective, he worked for West Detectives, and we moved to Mount Airy. And literally, I grew up on Durham Street, right around the corner from Enon, the larger church now. As a child, I grew up at the smaller church, you know, Enon on Coulter Street. My grandparents they didn't own it. They rented a house in the 1930s and raised their 9 children who went to Enon. And I was baptized there at age 13. So those 9 children had children. And so we have a long lineage there. But when we moved to Mount Airy and he became a homicide detective, I started paying attention, like even the fact that he would go back to our old neighborhood, right? And he knew every guy, especially the Black males. He knew them by name. They knew him as Officer Allen. They had a relationship. They
they communed, if you will. And these days, it doesn't seem like the community knows the officers or the officers know the community, right? And so that's what I witnessed in terms of community engagement. I know that's what you're about. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been up to with regards to community engagement in your role now, and even when you were a police officer, and how you got to know the community?
Thank you again for having me on, and I'm excited to have this conversation. I think you really raised a good question there. I think it's important that those who are in law enforcement, we use this language, community and police, or community and cops. And I think that is important that for those who are part of the law enforcement community to see themselves a part of the larger community, that is not these two separate entities. I think as long as we keep saying community and police as if they're not the same, that's when we're going to continue to have this separation, or where it seems as that there's two different entities. I think it's important for those who are in law enforcement to be the ones that initiate the relationship, and really to initiate the work that it takes to repair the relationship, particularly between Black and Brown communities, and between marginalized communities. There is a history that most of us know between the police and Black and Brown communities, whether we're talking police misconduct or police brutality, or we're talking about the killing of unarmed Black men and women across this country. Those who come into law enforcement must understand that they're entering into a space where the tensions are high, and understandably so. And so it's important for those who are coming onto the streets, particularly if they are not from the city where they serve, to take some time, whether it be during the course of their shift, or even volunteering some time during their off-duty time, to learn who the community stakeholders are, who the faith leaders are, who the elected officials are in that area, who the players are, even on the street, some who are quote unquote in the game, just to understand the community and understand that even persons who might be trapped in a lifestyle right now, that does not necessarily speak to who they are as a person. We're still talking about people who are human beings. So I think it's important that those who are in law enforcement see the need and the value of engaging and building relationships. The reality is that those who are from Philly, who are serving in the police department, or in other cities across this country, when you're from a particular space, you have a vested interest in seeing communities change, seeing communities transformed, seeing communities revived. You have a vested interest. And I think one of the challenges that we see in police departments across this country is that you have people who are coming into those departments who are more eager to be law enforcement, but not as passionate about building relationships. And you can't do one without the other. You cannot effectively enforce and effectively maintain a sense of public safety without having relationships, and deep relationships with those who live in that community. And so I think it's important to establish that trust. I think it's important to not just establish it, but to initiate. We are people of faith. And so I'll use this scripture here. There's a proverb that says, to be a friend, you must first present yourself friendly. And if we're not doing that as individual officers, or if the institution of law enforcement is not presenting itself friendly to the community it serves, we're going to have problems.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I agree 1,000%. Jessica says breathing for the guys and gals in blue, or I would say men and women in blue here in Billings, Minnesota. I think it's Minnesota, Massachusetts, MT. Okay. So they might not act in fear, but do better as they have been trained. Has been an interesting morning here for them. Rich Austin says, Greg, you've always been a stand-up dude. You remember Rich Austin? He came in and just began to embrace the community. Angelique says, are the police from the communities they serve? I have a hard time seeing them as a part of the community if they aren't from those areas. That's just to your point, what you were saying. And what is there to the community other than to pay
the paycheck?
I think Angelique has a point here because we see this in the police department here in Philly, and I'm sure it's also true in other areas around the country. There's no incentive for community policing, and let me explain that. So, if an officer right now is patrolling the streets and they observe criminal activity afoot, depending on what that criminal activity is, they can calculate in their mind that if I get an arrest for, let's say, a domestic, or let's say a narcotic situation, a possession with intent to distribute, they can almost guesstimate how many court listings that they'll have, because you are making an arrest, you go to court, you get paid. And so there is a financial incentive for making arrests. And I'm not suggesting that arrests ought not happen. There are some people who need to be arrested, but the arresting process is incentivized. So as you arrest, you go to court. As you go to court, you get more overtime. As you get overtime, you're making money. And then there's also awards, incentives where you get awards for a certain amount of arrests. You get awards for being, top cop, if you would, on the enforcement side. But for a innovative, compassionate, community-oriented officer who decides, you know what, I want to start a mentoring program for young men and women in the city of Philadelphia, or I want to start a workforce development program to help connect those who are in the community to jobs, or I want to start some type of program that really helps to build bridges. There is no incentive for that. And so the culture within law enforcement pushes officers to understanding what a good cop means is to be someone who is strong on the enforcement side, and that anything else on the community side is really social work, but not necessarily the role of the police officer. I think there has to be a paradigm shift in law enforcement where those who are part of the law enforcement community understands, yes, the enforcement piece has to happen, but more than being a paramilitary organization, it's important that those of us who are in this space see ourselves in a service-based industry where we're providing a service to a community. And we provide a service to a community. There's a certain way you communicate. There's a certain way you respond. There's a certain way you talk. There's a certain way that you learn and understand. And I agree with my sister Angelique here, who I don't know, but I agree with her. When she raised the question, if you're not from the community, it's hard to see that those individuals a part of. And yes, and that's why I believe that those who aren't a part of the community, be they Black, be they white, be they Latino, if you're not from that particular community, you need to spend some months, sometimes it take even years, to really establish that trust and initiate it, so that people don't know you by the patch on your arm, but they get to know you by the name that's on your chest.
Yeah, that's the case with my dad, right? And our pastor used to say, rules without relationship equal rebellion.
Absolutely.
And so there you have it, with a level of rebellion with regards to lack of relationship that they have. And also just thinking about the law enforcement versus protect and serve. Which side are you on? Yes,
Certainly.
we need to have enforcement of the law, but if they have that without the protecting and serving part of it, then they've missed the opportunity for that relationship that you're talking about.
Certainly. Yep.
Nicole says engaging positively in the community you serve is very important. Community policing is important. Officer Tommy Norman is a great example. I think that's correct. Richard Austin says, "Wow, Greg, how are you embracing the change of to reconstruct the policing in America?"
Yeah.
And to that, I would add the reforming and the transforming, because you speak a lot about that when I've heard you talk before, that you really believe in creating innovative ways to actually have reformation and transformation.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you, Rich, for that question. I think that those of us who are working in this space, that we should be, two things that we should be pushing right now, and that is police accountability and police reform. And sometimes when you use that language, some within this space will automatically associate that with people being anti-police. And so just because you believe in that you're pushing and advocating for police reform and pushing for police accountability does not mean you're anti-police. It just means that you want to see a better system. It doesn't mean that everyone within that system is bad. It just means that it's hard to see good in a racist system. It's almost, I think about my comrades in activism that use the language "no good cop in a racist system." Many cops hear that and then say, "Well, wow, you're anti-police." It's hard to see good when the system is inherently bad. So police reform, I think when we talk about reform, some things that we certainly need to see. I see a sister who just raised some question around training. Training is essential, it's crucial. I think that those who are leaders within police departments across this country need to ask themselves the question, how much training am I devoting, or how much time in training am I devoting to tactical training, and how much am I devoting to service-based training? And service dealing with de-escalation, service dealing with implicit bias, but also dealing with anti-racism, which there is a difference between those two training. Dealing with just communication. I mean, if I was the chief of police somewhere across this country, which I plan to be one day in the future, but if I was a police chief, if I was a police chief somewhere across this country, I would be thinking about what does it mean to bring in a corporate trainer from the Hyatt or a corporate trainer from some hospitality industry to just speak to my officers about communication, about customer service skills, those pieces that we're lacking right now in this industry. That's not an indictment to every officer. That's just saying in general as an institution. So I think we need to focus our training a bit, not just on the tactical piece, but also on the service-based piece. I think we need to look at our background investigation units in every police department. A part of the recruitment piece is that there's a background investigation unit that investigates and determines who's going to be hired onto the police department. There was an article that just came out in the Philadelphia Inquirer. The police department here in the city has hovered as far as its African-American numbers. Those who are African-Americans in the police department has always been somewhere between like 30 to 35%. I think right now we're around 31, 32% as far as police officers who are African-American. In a city where, African-Americans make up about 48% of the population here, I think we certainly need to see a higher number of African-Americans, and not just those who are Black or African-American in color, but those who are from the city and from the city of Philadelphia. And those who Angelique mentioned had vested interest in the particular community that they serve. And diversity is important, but we don't just need diversity. We need disruptors. We need people who are willing to come in. I'm sorry about that. We need people who are willing to come in and to disrupt the system. I take that from Kevin Hardin Esquire, who argues the difference between diversity and disruption. We need people who are courageous enough, but that means that the departments have to be willing to embrace people and not ostracize them once they're in, but embracing those who will help to transform from the bottom up. And so when we talk about reform, we're talking about a need to really look at training. We're talking about the need to look at who we're allowing to come onto the job. I think that we need to have the community's voice and community's input in the hiring process. What we don't see in a lot of police departments across the country is that you don't have committees of civilians, of residents who's in the hiring process. So yes, you ought to go see a psychiatrist. And yes, you ought to do a physical exam. And yes, you ought to go run 1.5 miles or 2. And yes, you ought to meet with, do a polygraph. But there should be a station along the hiring process that says, here's 5 trusted or 7 trusted community stakeholders from different walks of life, different social economic statuses, different pedigrees, who are here, and they're going to ask you some questions and give you some scenarios. The community should have a choice as to who is serving within their community and who's not. And for any department not to allow the community to have that voice on the front end, shame on them. So that's some of the reform. I think I know right now there's a lot of conversation around defunding the police, and so I'm sure that's going to come up. So I might as well tackle it while we're here. I'm certainly I certainly agree with the notion that we ought to invest more money in prevention than we do in policing. And that is, I don't believe that we ought to abolish police. We need police. We need good police. We need compassionate police. We need competent police officers. And there are many who serve across this country. But we also need to understand that when our city, Philadelphia, and when other cities have had a decent number of police patrolling the streets and well-funded police departments, it has not necessarily made our city safer. And so it doesn't mean that the police aren't doing their job. It simply means that the police can't do it by themselves. And so we have to reallocate resources to education. We have to reallocate resources to prevention. We have to reallocate resources to training, to workforce development, to soft skills training, particularly for those who are returning citizens. We have to invest those dollars in the right place. And so, with a city that has a budget, I think, of about $4 billion, somewhere in there, and $800 million is going towards police, we're not investing as much as we are in policing as we do in education and in some other areas. So I think we really need to reallocate some funds to prevention, to education, to training, to really and to workforce development to help deal with the real systemic issues, which is poverty, which is underfunded schools, to deal with the real root cause of many of the public safety issues that we see across this country. So I'm all about police reform. I'm all about advocating for those who are marginalized. I'm all about reinvesting into communities that need it most. And just locking everybody up is not the answer to every question, to the solution to the problem. Certainly, there are some people who need to be away for some time. Those who are doing violent crime, those who are shooting up neighborhoods. But we got to get to young people, and we got to get to those who are willing to change. And until we start putting resources in the right place, we won't see change in our community.
Yeah, so Joe, so that's good. That's really good, because I think that, sometimes what I've heard from my clients is police officers don't want to be social workers anyway. They don't want to go to the to doors and deal with some of the things that they've been having to deal with and not doing well. But Joe Budd says we have reached out to 14th district to get officers to engage the community through our food distribution program. However, none have joined us yet. Should we continue to push, or should we wait for them to initiate? That is the question to you.
Yeah, Joe Budd, great question. I won't speak for the police department, as I work for the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, but I will say Captain Smith is the captain of the 14th District. Nick Smith, he's a good guy, and his community relations officer over there is also a police officer, Smith, just ironically. Definitely reach out to them if you have not already. If you can't get to Captain Smith, the inspector, police inspector who oversees that entire Northwest area, and the captains report to him. His name is Deshaun Buford. I worked with him when he was a captain out in Southwest Division, and he was a captain in 12th District before getting promoted to inspector. He's certainly a community-oriented guy, as is Captain Smith. But let's be real here. They're dealing with a lot right now. Of course, we just came through the last few weeks. There was a lot of peaceful protests, but there was a lot of other things going on as well. And so they've been busy. And gun violence is up. Homicides are up in the city about 24% from this time last year. And so they've been busy. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's an excuse for no response to you. I'm suggesting that if you reach out to the captain, I'm certain that he will connect you with this community relations officer, and they'll kind of think through what it looks like to help come alongside of you. But here on another note, you do have the chief of community engagement from the DA's office. And we have some prosecutors in the DA's office that would love to volunteer at your food distribution center. So please connect with RG, send her an inbox, or you can reach out to me at glamar, that's GLAMAR .stewart, STEWART, at phila.gov. And let's talk about how we at the DA's office can support the work that you have going on over in Northwest.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Joe. Velva says, I applaud that taking the job to the streets program, your job that you implemented, and all those who joined forces with you spoke the sensitivity of how economics plays a critical issue for brothers and sisters. And I think she was talking about the Turning the Corner program that you initiated. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that. That's awesome.
Yes. So good seeing you, and tell Brother Gene I said hello. So Turning a New Corner was a program while I was still with the Philadelphia Police Department. It was the first workforce development program started through the police department. I went when former Police Commissioner Richard Ross was still there. I walked up to him and kind of said, "Listen, this is something that I want to do," and he gave the green light for it. And so when I was in patrol, I would drive down the street and I would respond to different assignments and just talk. A lot of times I wasn't investigating. I'll just be walking up to men and women who were on the corner, whether on duty or off duty. And I would ask them, like, what do you need to consider a different lifestyle? And many of them would say, "Hey, listen, if I could just get a sustainable wages, if I could just get a job that pays me enough to take care of me and my kids, or me and my girlfriend, or me and my family, and some sisters who are out there as well." They say, "Look, if I could just get it," and I say, "How much money you need?" And most of them would say like 14, 15, 16 hours an hour, full time. And that they would just walk away from that life. So the idea of, well, let me help these men and women turn a new corner. So what we did was every first Friday of the month, we would bring about 20 employers to 4 corners across the city of Philadelphia. Some of the corners that was the most violent corners, meaning that well known for both gun activity and drug activity. And we showed up in a van with employers at nighttime, and we literally turned those corners into job interview sites. And so that initiative, which lasted for about 8 months, we were able to see about 70 people find sustainable employment through that program. And so was excited about that. Then when I got to the DA's office, I started something very similar called One Stop Job and Resource Hub. Very similar to Turning a New Corner, but essentially I realized that with Turning a New Corner, we were getting people employed, but there were other services that they sometimes needed to sustain that employment. Because we're talking about men and women who may not have ever worked before or had a conventional job. And so to go from being a subcontractor, if you would, on the street corner, to now having a supervisor telling you to pull your pants up or to be somewhere on time, when previously you can wake up whenever you wanted to go to your corner and make whatever money you wanted. I won't talk about the drug game, so let me continue. But nonetheless, I realized that sometimes those individuals needed a little bit more to help support them in their path. And so One Stop is a more robust version of Turning a New Corner, where not only do we have employers, but every first Thursday of the month, we bring 75 employers and other social service providers to include victim service agencies, trauma-informed care professionals, housing professionals, financial literacy professionals, some colleges and vocational training institutions, to a rec center or to a school or some type of community building. And we did this pre-COVID, of course, every first Thursday of the month. And so we went to neighborhoods that needed it the most marginalized spaces, and we brought those services. And we're seeing 200 to 300 people, sometimes 400 or 500 people show up to these events, and they're all at nighttime. Now we have our next one coming up, and I'll send the information to Dr. Argy to make sure she has it. But we're doing something on July 9th. It's a Thursday evening. July 9th is a Thursday evening. It's going to actually be a virtual One Stop. And so we're excited to announce that. If you follow the DA's office social media page at Phila DAO, whether on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you'll see that information popping up here in the next few days.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you, what are you doing since COVID? So you answered that you're doing it in the online space. So that's awesome. Here's an interesting question from Joyce Myers, who says that, why does it seem like the Philadelphia Police Department is still not hiring minorities no matter what the amount? And I told a story yesterday because we had a Brandville Bard's daughter on, Taylor Grace Bard, and Alicia Taylor Bard on. And they sort of talked. Do you remember? Do you know who I'm talking about? Alicia Taylor was the previous chief director for communications for the mayor. Now she's married to Brandon Barr, who's the chief of police in
Cambridge. She's the man.
Yeah.
And she's a rock star.
Yes, absolutely. So her daughter shared a poem about what was going on in terms of police brutality. And, he's done a lot of stuff around police reform. But my point, I guess, in this question that Joyce asked is that my dad had problems getting on the police force. We would have exponentially had a different life had he allowed the racist blocks of him not getting on the police force keep him down. But he went to Cecil B. Moore, who was a lawyer for the people, and they realized that they were blocking a lot of Black and brown people from getting on the police force. And he sued them, and he ended up getting onto the police force and then becoming a homicide detective. But our lives would have been exponentially different had he not continued to fight to get elevated in that space. And that was over 50 years ago. So can you speak to why that is, that there's so little numbers, or that this is still happening?
Yeah, it's still an issue. I'm going to try not to get in trouble here, but it's certainly still an issue. I have friends who are actually working for other municipalities, local municipalities, whether that be transit here in Philly, SEPTA Police, some who are at Temple. And when I was the vice president for the National Black Police Association, we had conversations with individuals in the community who may have had one blemish on their record, maybe from when they were juvenile, or something even when they were younger as an adult, that I know other people who are currently on the job or who I came through the academy with, who had the same blemish, but may have had a different complexion, or who had the same blemish, but was able to make a phone call because they are part of a family of police officers. And unfortunately, sometimes those of us of ebony hue, we don't have that access to call that uncle or that cousin or that person who is connected to the union that can help push them along. I think it's certainly something that the new police commissioner, Danielle Outlaw, who I support and affirm and hope that she's successful in what she does, is something I think she should definitely take a look at, because there are African Americans out here in the city of Philadelphia, young people who want to be on this job, who want to help transform the system, that want to come in, that have innovation, that have ideas. But sometimes people are afraid of their privilege and their space being violated. This department in Philadelphia has historically been, and I'm going to use this language, owned by a few, and a few not so much in number, but a few as far as persons that we're talking about, and they want to maintain that power and that control. And so I think when we talk about transforming the system, we got to make room for others to come on, giving them opportunities. There has to be real opportunities created for other folks in the community who want to be a part of it, particularly those who are Black and brown. And again, once we create that space for them, making sure that we don't have barriers in the way when they bring their ideas to the table. It's something that I saw while I was on the job in Philly, or I should say with the police department, that if you think outside the box a little bit, you can quickly be ostracized. And so you got to have a department that's willing to create a space for young Black officers, young Latino officers, young minority officers to be able to flourish, but also have a space where their ideas can be heard.
Yeah, I totally agree. So listen, there is a question that I've been wondering, and Megan asked that. So we're going to do that. We're going to answer that question. You're going to answer that question when we come back about what's going on with the fireworks from sunup to sundown. But we got to pay the bills, so we're going to take a quick break. Think about that, and then we'll talk about that when you come back. Okay?
Okay.
And we are back. This is Dr. RG with the Courageous Conversations Connect space, and we have our quarantine talks, our crew, connecting relationships for epic wins. If you have not done so, please tag a friend, share this post, share this video. We have an amazing young man on who I call my brother and friend, G. Lamar Stewart, and he has just been giving us a plethora of great information about the healing and the trauma that goes on when you are a part of two demographics, really, Black as a Black man and also blue. So Megan asked this question about the fireworks. I've been wondering about this too. Like, this has been going on since Memorial Day. These fireworks, like, it starts around 3 and then it goes on until like 3 in the morning. And in some communities, you don't know whether it's the fireworks or gunshots. It's very, very scary. And quite frankly, it's a little annoying. So can you give us sort of your purview about what you think is going on?
I'm always going to answer truthful. I don't know. I'm hearing I'm hearing it around my neighborhood as well. I live in Northwest, and I don't know. I know it's something that the city, both police department and the managing director's office, they're trying to get their hands around, figure out what's going on. I just don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. I think that the police department and the city, they're trying to do their best to figure out how to enforce it. But it's something that I know is definitely on the table in a conversation that's happening across city agencies as we speak.
Well, here's my theory, Greg. I wonder if it has to do with COVID and people in quarantine and not being able to go and do their normal recreational activities. And so it's something to do, and some of them are quite beautiful in our area. It's just that it tends to go on for so long. And in the past, when I've heard fireworks, it's usually around the holiday, and it may last a few days before or after, but this has been continual.
Yep.
It's pretty interesting. I want to ask you a question about the mental health and well-being of the officers and their families, because I do, this work in terms of the clinical work, and I certainly have several law enforcement officers, both male and female, and many of them talk about the stress, the trauma of the protests. No one wants to have urine and water and feces thrown on you, or be told that you're a sellout, or that you are a slave catcher, or, they're dealing with a whole lot of trauma. Just for some of the ones that are just really, really good and went into policing in order to help people and to protect people. And now they're having to deal with, quite frankly, going on the job, doing 14-hour stints and being abused by persons who are outraged. Now, that coupled with the fact that we know that MLK said that riots are the language of the unheard. So we want to elevate voices, but how do we bridge that gap when the law enforcement officers are feeling violated themselves?
Man, that's a great question. I'll do my best to respond to it. Let me first just say that I salute all law enforcement officers that are doing the job the right way. And there are many across this city and many across this country that come to work each day, and they do it with a level of compassion, with a level of sympathy, with a level of commitment and professionalism, and I salute that. And I agree with you. There are individuals who have gotten on this job and they really want to do the right thing, but joined and came on at a time where there's great challenge. And there's been great challenge. There's some history there. I think that's where we really, when we talk about, and I'm speaking even right now to an officer who may be listening, or someone who's a family member of an officer, that anytime you join, or anytime you apply and you're hired with a company or an organization, you have to understand the history and what that organization, what they may have done, and the challenges that exist. And so, and understand that sometimes an attack of the institution or the industry is not an attack of the individual officer. The only way that you can successfully do that is if you, as an individual officer, learn how to separate yourself from your uniform. And so I am Gregory Lamar Stewart Sr. I so happen to be a law enforcement officer as one of the hats that I wear. But who I am and what I do aren't the same thing. So when you attack the industry and when you attack, and let me not use the word attack, when you in some ways rightfully condemn certain activities that the institution and industry has allowed, when you rightfully condemn and rightfully critique some of what's come out of the industry and some of what's come out of the institution, that is not a personal attack. I think officers have to be very careful that when they hear criticism about policing, that they don't internalize that to mean that they themselves are a problem, unless they themselves are the problem. And so I think that piece becomes important. But the policing in of itself, it is a very challenging job. For me, standing on the protest lines when I was in patrol in the uniform wasn't difficult for me, because truth is, many times when I heard rhetoric coming from activists and protesters, I agreed with it. Black Lives Matter. I agree with that. I think it's important for officers, if they really believe it, that they ought to say it sometimes and be willing to say it and say it boldly and not respond to Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter, because if all lives matter, you ought to be able to say Black Lives Matter. And so being able to say that and to say it at a protest, I think if I'm the leader of a police department, I'm also going to think about what it looks like when I know that there's going to be a protest, particularly around a cause that I agree with and that the institution agreed with, something that's righteous, something that's integral, like the death of George Floyd. Not waiting until after there's an uprising, or after not waiting until after there is protest to then come out. How about proactively joining in, saying, we're here not to police you, we're here to actually stand in solidarity with you. We're here to walk with you. We're here to kneel with you, because we affirm that we want justice for George Floyd, that we want justice for Breonna Taylor, that we want justice for Mr. Brooks, that we want justice for those who have been killed in America by the system that we so happen to represent. I think we have to think through, those who are in law enforcement have to think through what type of posture that we take when these protests are going on, particularly when there are legitimate causes. And perhaps we've seen it done. Camden got it right. Flint, Michigan got it right. And as a result, they did not see as much looting in those places, because when your posture, your heart posture is right, and when you approach it and you're proactive around going back to the original question, engaging with the people, then the people will know that your heart's right, and you won't see as much of the stuff happening in the community. So I want to say that. Secondly, policing is hard. I said a minute ago that the protest is not the most difficult part for me. In my experience, what has been difficult for me is responding to the scene of shootings. I think about a young man named Samaj Obranti, who was just shot in November. He was 10 at the time, shot in the back of his head on his way home from school, and lived, but shot in the back of his head as he's walking home from school at 10 years old. I think about a young lady, 16-year-old named Samaria, who was shot at 22nd and Sedgley, where 22nd Sedgley and Cumberland meet. She was a block away from home, just leaving what we call the gallery, but now they call the Fashion District, just trying to get home, and got off the bus, and a gunman opened fire, and she was shot right there and wound up dying. And she was a classmate, actually sat next to my oldest son, Trey, in school at mathematics, civics, and sciences. I think about young people who are now becoming, that the trauma that they're experiencing and seeing shootings happening on their block on a regular basis. The seniors that are seeing this, the community as a whole that's seeing it is become such a norm. The level of gun violence that we're seeing in the city, and that officers also are responding to this. And for many officers who aren't from the community that we're talking about, For those of us who grew up in Germantown and North Philly and West Philly, down at bottom, Brickyard, Happy Hollow. For those of us who grew up in Logan, Nicetown, certain part of this we understand because we grew up in it. But if you didn't grow up in this, and this is your first time to Philly, and the only time you've come in is to go put a uniform on, and every time you're responding to a job, you're responding in the time of crisis, and it has a way. I don't care how strong you think you are, but it has a way of doing something to you, even for those of us who grew up in it. And so I think it's important, and I've probably seen it on my social media more now than ever before, where officers are saying, we are not all right. And I wonder how much right now the department is mandating for officers to sit down with someone. I wonder how much right now the department is willing to contract with other agencies and other organizations and other folks in this space of helping in this way, like Dr. Argy, to really be able to say, we need your help to help us so that we can do this, because we know that hurt people. And if I'm dealing with trauma, and if I'm suffering within, I'm not even in a space to really be able to patrol. But I got to keep on putting on face. I got to keep on putting on this uniform, because if I say I'm not right, if I say I'm not ready, then I might appear to be weak in that moment. And that's not something that is popular when you're in this space called law enforcement. And so I think there are many officers who need some help, and who need to talk to somebody right now, who may not feel comfortable with doing so, because they're doing heroic work every day. But our heroes also need help.
That's right. Heroes need help, and their families as well. I will tell you that most people are saying that I know that they're not getting the help that they need. And subsequently, people are kind of turning a blind ear to it and saying, just get back out there and do the work. In particular, this idea, which I love the term, Dr. Robin DeAngelis talks about, Angelo talks about white fragility, and Megan talks about, she's saying it's police fragility, right? Have you heard that term before? Police fragility?
White fragility. I get it.
Yeah. So I think to a certain degree, when you're talking about that, what does that look like when you're trying to raise these issues, but you're not being heard? That's no different than the riots out there where people are saying we're not heard, but you police officers, many of you are not heard as well. So now you've got a collision between these two viruses, COVID-19 and systemic racism, and a collision between, these demographics that are not well, both in blue and in black. That's a recipe for disaster.
It is. I am of the thought that the professional always has the responsibility to bridge the gap or initiate that. And so even if the officer on the street level may be dealing with trauma, and right now they're not in a space where they can even get it together, I think the institution has a responsibility. So we have to hold the leadership of police departments across the country accountable to make sure that their officers are well, and that while they're managing the emotional and the emotional state of officers, and making sure their emotional health is right, that they're also thinking through how to bring the community in to the table, to bring psychologists and psychiatrists to the table, to bring trauma professionals to the table, to talk about what it looks like to help heal departments, but also what it looks like to help heal communities, and to allow the community and stakeholders to the table to have a conversation and create action plans as to what does it look like to move forward from here, with the police taking a posture that we don't find ourselves back in this place again.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about healing, we're going to, shift this conversation. But Dr. Gail Logan says the psychological first aid course would be helpful for officers. That has been a great course. And what I would say is that the system needs to be open to it, right? And oftentimes even the officers need to be open to it, because I think you have a valid point, Greg, that, if officers share what they're really feeling and they're not well, then they may feel like they face possibly losing their jobs, because we have to do a better job of normalizing mental health issues. What's interesting about it is that we normalize physical health issues. Now, nobody would ever, spend 50 years of their life and never go to a medical doctor, right? For a common cold or whatever ailment that they have. We would not have COVID-19 and not go to the doctor to deal with it. And yet we can have mental health challenges based on, real stressors and real issues and valid, systems that have kept us in an unhealthy space. And yet this larger system, the larger discourse is that if you do this, then you're either weak or you're unstable or you can't do the job.
Yeah,
True.
And while we have that, it's just as hard as it is for some folks to say, I'm not dealing with trauma, is as hard for some folks to say, I might have racist thoughts. And it's important for the leadership of these institutions to say, just like there's a need to implement trauma care and wellness for our officers, it's equally important to implement anti-racism training and do it proactively. We should not have to wait till these major events happen where someone's life is either taken or someone's hurt in order to begin to implement these type of programs.
Absolutely. Morgan, you had something?
Hey, young man, how you doing, buddy?
How you doing, sir?
Listen, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate that. I want to put you on the spot, man. Listen, many of the viewers, there you go, are saying this conversation is so rich and it needs to be a continual conversation. So I want to know right here on the Ask Dr. Archie Courageous Conversation Connect show, if you will commit to coming on at least once a month from the DA's office to give a community report on policing, because we need voices like you right here who wear the badge to connect, because there's so many questions. I can't put all the questions on that's coming in the chat. People really are hungry for connection. We want to hold police departments accountable, but we want to hear directly from you guys, and you for sure is a voice heard. So we want to know if you can commit to coming on at least once a month.
I certainly can. Whenever you guys reach out and say that, okay.
Couldn't hear him. Can you hear?
Yep, we good?
Yeah, you good now. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm willing to commit. Whenever you would have me, I definitely would come. And however I can help you connect with other officers, particularly those who are working in the Philadelphia Police Department at any level of the rank, whether we're talking to officers on the street, middle management, or even at the command level. However I can support, I appreciate the work that you all are doing and even creating this space for these conversations.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So
I think you're still muted, Dr. Archie.
Okay, I'm so sorry. We gotta get that right. Morgan's doing the producing and behind the scenes, so I don't do that work. Listen, one, I want to just thank you. I want to honor your time. We said an hour, so we're going to transition, and then of course everyone knows that I still continue to do the clinical work, and so I start my clinical work at 12 noon and continue to do that work throughout the day. But I want to thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for sharing your information with us. And thank you for just being truthful and trustful and transparent. That's what we need in order for us to have these transformational breakthroughs. So I don't take it lightly that you would come on the show and share your heart with us, our crew. And I'm glad we're going to ask you that question of whether you come back, because again, of course, we'll see you and we'll talk, but at the end of the day, we want our crew to be able to get this information. So thank you. Any last things you want to say before we transition?
Listen, I and Morgan as well, and to all of your listeners and viewers, thank you for you all spending your time with us today. And just know that there are a few of us. There's a remnant within this industry that really believe in the work of activism, that believe in police reform, that believe in police accountability, and that has a strong sensitivity to the plights and concerns of community. Particularly marginalized communities, particularly Black and Brown communities. And we're going to continue to fight for you and fight for the people.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Go on about your day. Thank you so much. And for everybody in the crew, listen, we love you. There's nothing you can do about it. Have a beautiful day on purpose from our heart to yours. Thank you, G. Lamar Stewart.
Thank you, Dr. Argy.